Hello. Today we're talking about the hammer. What's in a hammer? Actually more than you might think. Ultimately it's true, a hammer, you're probably going to decide on one that feels good in your hand, has a good balance, but there is more to it than you think, and today we're going to talk about some of those things. And let's start off by talking about the handle. So this is a steel handle. It is pretty much the strongest handle you can get. The downfall is it's heavy. So strong but heavy, and the other downfall is that it causes a lot of vibration. When you hit a nail, a lot of the vibration ends up in your joints, which causes some problems. The people who like the steel hammer the best probably are the guys who don't have to carry it around all day. And actually a lot of the guys like the masons especially, who do some form work. It can be heavy, they're swinging down low, and when they're done, they throw it on the ground and it sits there, and boy, if they drive over it, it probably is not going to hurt it. So steel, heavy but solid. Next, fiberglass. Fiberglass is much lighter and the vibrations are much less than the steel hammer. And it's non-conductive, of course, which is nice, so the electricians, they like the fiberglass. And the other thing is, a lot of plumbers and guys who kind of rummage around in crawl spaces or attics like them because you can actually get a pretty decent one for cheap, and they end up oftentimes losing them down in these crawl spaces or leaving them behind wall spaces, that sort of thing. The next we have the wood hammer, or wood handle. Wood is probably the lightest of the bunch, and it's definitely the least vibrations. So if you hit a hammer, hit a cat's paw, hit whatever, fewer vibrations are going to travel from the head up into your joints. So if you're swinging a hammer a lot, a wood handle is probably what you're going to want. If you're doing a lot of demo, a wood hammer, it's going to break. It's not as strong. You don't want to crank on it like this and hang on it. It's going to bust. So you got to be a little more careful. But the vibration factor, the lightness factor, so if you're swinging a hammer a lot and it's hanging in your pouch all day long, you probably want to go with wood. Next, let's talk about hammer heads. The first question everybody wants to know is how heavy of a hammerhead should I get? And that depends on a few things. Again, back to if you carry it all the time, like framers, everybody has guns nowadays, so they don't even use their hammer all that much, but they have to really have it all the time. So framers actually like a little bit lighter hammer, and back to the masons, they don't use it all the time, and they're kind of hitting down low, so a heavier hammer, it works fine for them. And the thing is, also, the other thing that you got to consider is how strong you are, because a big giant hammer, you'd think it would drive the nail in faster with more force, but technically force depends on the weight of the hammer and how fast you can swing it. So if you have a gigantic hammer that's too heavy for you and you can't hardly swing it very fast, that's not doing you any favors. There's kind of a balance between speed and power, so it really kind of matters how strong you are, basically. And consider if you use it a lot. I mean, if you're like a siding guy doing soffits all day doing this, you don't want a big, giant, heavy hammer. And as far as weight goes, let's talk about titanium for a minute. So this thing looks like a beast, but it's actually, this is a 16-ounce hammer, and this is a 14-ounce hammer. And that's because this one's made out of titanium. Titanium is very, very light. Titanium also has the quality that when you hit a nail with a steel hammer, 30% of those vibrations are recoiled back through the hammer. I mean, the grip picks up some of it, so if you have a better grip, it mitigates some of it, but the steel part actually recoils 30% back, and a lot of that, again, is going to hit your wrists and your elbows and your other joints. With titanium, when you hit a nail, only 3% compared to 30% recoils back. So that means you can swing a lot lighter hammer and get the same effect, and if you swing a lot lighter hammer, you can swing it faster and get even more of effect. So a lot of guys like the titanium, but it's expensive. These start probably around 80, 90, well, probably $90, and for super fancy ones, you can go up well over $200. But if you swing a hammer a lot and you're worried about your joints, titanium's the way to go. The other thing to consider is the face, and that's a pretty simple decision. If you're a framer, you probably want a milled face, or a waffle face, some guys call. That's designed for when you're hitting a nail. It if you're off a little bit, it'll still drive the nail down without bending it over. But that waffle face is not going to do any favors if you're, trying to sink a brad or something in any kind of finish. If you're working with finished siding, finished trim, anything where you don't want to leave big waffle marks in it, a smooth face is the way to go. Let's talk about hammer claws. There's basically two types. There's a straight claw and a curved claw. Straight claws are much more popular nowadays, but curved claws have their place. One thing nice about a curved claw is if you're pulling a nail, you can actually pull a fairly long nail out because the travel of the claw is a lot further than you get with a straight claw. The other thing is, back to our electricians and plumbers who have to mess around in crawl spaces and attics, that claw doesn't stick so far out, so if it's on your pouch or tucked in somewhere, it's not going to catch on things when you're crawling through. But most people these days prefer the straight claw, but they also sometimes they don't think about, there's a couple kinds of straight claws. So this one is long and narrow, and this works great if you need to pick up a wall and you don't want to bend over like I don't. You can stab into it, and it stabs in because these things grab the wood and you can lift it up. The problem is these things, actually you can break these. If you're doing demo and you're like chipping away at something, these claws will break. So if you do a lot of demo, you might want to consider a straight claw with a little more stubby to it. See how more that's a little thicker and shorter. It doesn't stab as nice, but it'll hold up if you're really, beating the hell out of it. Believe it or not, hammers have features. It's not just a hunk of metal at the end of a stick. One nice feature is, and a lot more hammers have it, and before when they first came out with it, it was kind of weird and clunky looking, but it's a nail puller on the side of the hammer. So normally you get in here like this, that works great, but if you got tight spaces or if it's a really, really stubborn nail, you can get a ton of leverage by hooking onto it and cranking that way. I mean a ton, way, way more leverage. So that's nice. These flat hammers, they look cool. The flat heads, they actually have a purpose, which is kind of nice. If you need to get really close to a wall, let's say there's a nail sticking out and it's really close, you got a little more surface area to whack that thing without bending it over. And another nice feature is these magnetic nail holders. That's kind of sweet. You don't use them a ton, but where they really come in handy is if you're hanging off a ladder or scaffold, you need one hand to hang on to and you start the nail with that, and then you drive it home after it sticks in. So those are pretty slick. This hammer has a nice feature. I like the wood handles. The problem with wood handles, you let the newbie guy at the job site use it, or if you don't know what you're doing yourself, you'll end up missing a lot, and when you miss a nail, you end up hitting the handle part, and it really beats up the wood especially. So this is kind of as a strike guard, which is nice. So that's a good feature. And then there's all sorts of kind of different things. This hammer here is more of a demo hammer. It's got it's almost like a claw and or a hammer and a crowbar. So there's all sorts of cool features you can have these days. Ultimately, really, what you got to do is you got to figure out how you're going to use the hammer, what you're going to be using it for every day, and then before you buy one, go hold one in your hand, because once you figure out the features that you need and what work best for you, you want to hold one in your hand and see how it feels, and if you can pound a few nails in, that's even better. So go to a buddy or a job site or a neighbor or a relative and pick up their hammers and just see which one feels good. Maybe it's a steel one, maybe it's a fiberglass, maybe it's a wood. But you really, really want to hold it because that's ultimately going to make your decision as how that baby feels in your hands. All right, that's hammers. Now you know everything there is to know about hammers.